All right, so good afternoon again. Thank you so much to those who joined us, and thank you to Executive Alliance for partnering with us on the workshop about building effective boards for startups, a very important topic. Thank you to our panelist, Ann Quinn, CEO of Quinn Strategy Group, and thank you to our panelists today, Laura Neuman, who is entrepreneur in residence at the University of Maryland, Michele Cohen, partner at Miles and Stockbridge, and Guy Filippelli, managing partner at Squadra. So thank you so much. We're going to be very brief with introductions today. So why don't, Ann, you go ahead and take it from here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to launch our first poll of the day to get a quick feel of our audience today.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ala and Rebecca. I appreciate it. And what a great way to spend lunch with three of my favorite people, Laura, Guy, and Michele. What a real treat. I don't get to see you guys enough in our post-COVID world, or our current COVID world. So thanks so much for lending your perspective and your expertise to this conversation. We want to get a sense of who's in the audience so that we can tailor this conversation to attendees, and so that you'll get the most out of it. And so Ala just launched a poll, and I'm hoping she can share that poll and some of those findings with us so that we know who we're talking to. Today we have an agenda and kind of some format, but we're also going to be pausing throughout the panel discussion and asking and opening it up for Q&A so that you can ask your questions of these experts and get their perspective. Do we have the poll? Here we go. So we really want to understand kind of what's your current situation. Do you have a board of directors? Do you have a board of advisors? You have both? You don't have either? Because that'll steer some of our conversation.
And this is Rebecca. Just to add to that, if participants want to use the Q&A to ask questions, Ala and I will be masterminding that behind the scenes and make sure your questions are answered by the panel as time allows.
Okay, great, thanks. So it looks like we've got kind of participants are evenly split. Some have board of directors, some have board of advisors, some don't have either. And so that's really helpful. That we'll factor all of that in as we're kind of going through our conversation today. And then kind of the second poll that we wanted to run really talks about how you're funded, because funding will drive some of those decisions and discussions around the board of advisors or board of directors. So we want to make sure that we understand your funding situation as well. So let's do that poll. Are you a venture-backed company? Have you raised an angel round, friends and family? The first person to answer gets us to 100% on that. Are you trying to fund your growth organically with revenue? Or are you looking at grant funding, SBIR or other grant funding that will help you scale and grow your business? Okay. So lots of grant funding, friends and family, organic growth. Great, there's nothing wrong with any of those answers on how to scale and grow your business. All right, so let's just kind of jump in right to our first topic area, which is really around board of directors versus an advisory board. Now, a board of directors, if you're venture funded, will require that. Maybe even if you're have raised an angel round. The board of directors has fiduciary responsibility. They have voting rights. They're being compensated either through equity or kind of compensation to be on your board. A board of advisors is really a group of advisors in key topic areas that is committed to working with you to help scale and grow your business. Right, so one's a fiduciary, one is just kind of in your corner as allies. So Laura, as a board advisor, what's the typical structure or terms of an advisor's contract or relationship with the CEO or a founder?
Well, thank you for asking that. I'm happy to be here with you today, Ann. I love talking about early stage companies and really how to get it off the ground and some of the things that we have to deal with in making those early tough decisions. I will say the first time I went down this path, I was trying to understand what's the difference between a board of directors and a board of advisors. And, as you just shared, the board of directors is really once you incorporate. And they do have a fiduciary responsibility, meaning they have to act in the best interest of the organization. The board of advisors are people who help you really think about the strategy and development of your company. And I have taken on that role as a former entrepreneur. I've done it with several early stage companies. And I have to say that it is some of the most gratifying work I've ever done. As an advisor, I get to get really involved with the company and understand the work that they're doing and their mission. I get to work closely with the founders, the entrepreneurs who are building the company, and help them make the best decisions as they go forward. So I feel like I'm part of the team. I really enjoy that. I like being part of the team and thinking about how this company will unfold. But there's also a lot of responsibility there because typically that relationship includes equity. So I have a vested interest in the success of this company. It's not just that I show up for an occasional meeting. I'm an important part of the team because I have ownership of the company too. So the extent of that ownership, or whether that is paid or equity, really depends on where the company is and what their prospects are and what you negotiate with them. But for me, it's a really gratifying experience and a great way to be very involved with multiple companies.
Great. Good. Guy, I wanted to ask you, as an investor and knowing a little bit about Squadra, you've got a kind of a unique model. Can you talk about how you influence the structure of the board and the relationship you like to have with the CEO and other board members?
So thanks, Ann. I'm actually right now in Hood River, Oregon. I'm actually at the Portland Airport, where I just had a phenomenal kickoff with our latest investment, and essentially a quasi board meeting yesterday and a team building exercise the day before. But so I, I'll take one step back. Squadra is a venture fund. We write $1 to $2 million checks right now into early stage companies after they have been friends and family or angel seeded. So for everyone I know there's no venture-backed companies on the list right now, but that's great because I'm talking to the next generation here that's about to be, if that becomes the right choice.
Here's your pipeline.
I'm sitting personally on 8 boards right now as the managing partner of the fund. And it's hugely important for us because we're very activist type investors, and we see our role in addition to oversight. To Laura's point, there is a fiduciary responsibility. There's an especially important fiduciary responsibility when your investor is actually a representative of other investors like myself. That actually even ups, how serious I would argue we take it. In terms of responsibility, I've got people behind me that I'm representing, so I care a lot about oversight. I care a lot about understanding that on one side the CEO is not doing anything wrong, on the other side that he or she is doing a great job. But more importantly for us, what we have tried to do, and I don't think this is completely normal for all venture funds, especially ones that don't always come in as lead investors, we obsess about adding value. And I actually spent a good hour yesterday with this team, talking about that. And one of the leaders on the team said to me at the end of our day yesterday, she said, "I can't believe you didn't dive into our numbers more and dive into our ARR." And we thought, oh my gosh, the investor, blah blah blah. And I said, look, in reality, that's not what counts right now. That's what counts is us figuring out how we can be helpful and how we can use our machine to drive value into this business. Whether you did 1.6 million in revenue or 1.8 million in revenue last quarter and it was 10 or 20% more than your projections, I could really care less right now. Now, that will change over time as we get a plan established and we track against it. But I think great boards, I actually think what they have a balance between this whole oversight concept, which is super important, and this notion of maybe growth, whether growth is business, whether growth is funding, whether, capital. But I like to keep my balance more like 70-30 growth oversight in terms of focus, maybe even 80-20. Sometimes that takes a lot of trust with the management teams, but that's what we obsess about at Squadra.
And so, Guy, to do that, do you take a majority stake? Kind of how are you structuring that to make sure that that investment philosophy, which is different, is kind of imbued through the board and the way the board is relating to founders and management?
We don't take a majority stake. I mean, we're traditionally, the thing that normally happens, like if you're an angel backed or seed states, friends and family backed company, you're going to go now get to a point where you're going to raise your seed round and you're going to have a venture fund potentially lead that seed round. You may have 5 or 6 funds, but there's going to be one fund that leads, that writes the term sheet, that conducts the diligence, that reviews every single document in your data room, that holds you to your reps and warranties, et cetera. We tend to be 70% usually, at least, of an actual round. And that means we essentially control the preferred share class. So we have a hugely important vote, as Laura kind of referred to. We have rights as an investor. We have reps and warranties that are important. And we do that. I always say, like, if you're not the lead investor, the CEO, frankly, shouldn't be wasting his or her time on you, because especially if he or she has a bunch of them. But it's, for us, that's why we come in as the lead investor, right? And we really see ourselves as a partner. And I don't, it's not that it's massively unique. I mean, it's just most venture funds do a bit of both. They lead and then they sort of join in and collaborate with others on certain deals. So they may lead in certain deals and follow on other. Just because we're limited resources and just kind of getting where we're at, I've always said to our team, we don't have time to not be focused. So for us, we make one investment a quarter. We're always the lead investor. That's the way it is. So maybe when we raise a bigger fund and have more infrastructure, we'll start to do some more, quote, slightly more passive type investing. But for us, investment equals board seat equals intimate partner with CEO and management team. And that's our style.
Okay, thanks. So Michele, when you're representing business owners, are there things you suggest they kind of keep in mind as they're setting up and structuring either their board of directors or their board of advisors?
Yeah, and some of what I'm about to say, I think Laura and Guy have touched on. So let me approach it, as you suggested, from the viewpoint of the owner setting up the company. First, if I may be allowed to be a little lawyerly, if you are a corporation, you must have a board of directors, even if you, the sole stockholder, are also the sole director. It's a requirement. And as I think Laura mentioned, directors have statutory duties. They have a statutory duty of loyalty, fiduciary duties to the organization, and very importantly, they can be held legally liable in certain circumstances for the acts of the corporation. So I think one thing that's very important when you're dealing with a startup organization, you're asking maybe friends to be your directors or people you feel close to. I think it's very important to make sure they understand what they're taking on. A director can't just be a friend who comes in once a quarter, signs off on the financial statements and moves on. The director really has to be prepared to take the time and energy and interest to delve into the financial information to make sure the money's being spent wisely, things are being properly documented, et cetera, and be prepared to weigh in and make decisions that require a vote for the organization, maybe on direction, critical issues affecting the company. I know we'll talk a little bit later about some management tools, but I think that's really critical versus, as you said, an advisor who's really a support. somebody who's got maybe subject matter expertise, who's coming in really to be a counselor, not somebody who's actually a business person helping to direct the organization itself. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, again, getting a little lawyerly, for those in the audience who are set up as an LLC or a limited partnership, a board of directors is a concept tied to corporations. So if you are a limited liability company, for example, you may have something you call a board of directors, but legally it's not the same thing. It might be a management company or some other operating structure. So a little bit different in terms of the fiduciary obligations and the liability issues.
Sure. Laura, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Well, no, I just, I really love this conversation because, you know, when I listen to Guy talk about, I mean, Michele is one of the best lawyers out there. I've known her and worked with her for a very long time. I love hearing Guy talk about being a partner because, you know, when you're looking at investors for your company, you know, you always want that partner relationship. And sometimes it's not what it ends up being. It ends up being more about the numbers and less about the partnership and the strategy. So I'm really excited to hear that. You know, for a long time, we had a dearth of early stage investors, institutional investors in Maryland, and it's exciting to see that changing. So to hear you talk about it, I think is particularly exciting. But I also want to touch on reps and warranties. I'm not sure everyone knows what that is, and it is such an important part of the documentation when an investor comes into your company. So it might be helpful to just touch on that quickly.
That'd be great. Go ahead.
Michele, do you want to jump in there? Or would you like me to take it from the entrepreneur's perspective?
Why don't you take it from the entrepreneur's perspective, and then I can jump in if we need to add the sort of lawyerly stuff.
Your answer will be more detailed than mine for sure. So, you know, the first time I had to go through these documents when I was closing a financing round, I was like, what are reps and warranties? And everyone was talking about them. You know, when you go out and, you know, pitch your company or your idea to a potential investor, you're really talking about the best things that you have to offer in this business proposition. The reps and warranties are really the things that are the representations and ways that you are warranting that you stand behind this as a potential investment. And that means that you are saying in writing and legally binding that you stand behind everything that you've now offered to the potential investor in exchange for their choice to be a partner, financial partner at the table with you. So I don't want to skip over that. I want to make sure we really talk about it because it is so important in the relationship with your investor.
Yeah, and I think maybe adding on to that, the key thing, again, trying to approach it from a business perspective, is you don't want to overcommit or misstate you know, what you really know and what you're capable of offering at any point in time. I don't know if anyone besides me is following the Theranos trial, which is just absolutely fascinating, and the book Bad Blood I highly recommend. But a big part of that trial is going to be whether the jury agrees that the owners of the company shot high and fell hard, but they didn't misrepresent anything, versus actively lying to their investor class. So big bucks can be an issue here.
Great example.
Can I add one thing just in general, because unfortunately I'm about to board a flight, and I want to say one thing in response to what Laura said, if I could, and kind of say goodbye to everyone, but also say that if anybody on the group I can ever be helpful to anybody, my email is just guy@squadra.vc. Connect with me, shoot me a note and let me know. I can be helpful. But the one point I'll make on, partnerships and just to reinforce something that we do, when you get an investment for a venture fund, you get a term sheet. The term sheet tells you what we think your company's worth and everything we're going to demand of you, right? But it doesn't really say anything we're going to do for you, right? That's not the nature of what a term sheet is, right? So right from the start, we don't really have a partnership, by design. We have a.
It says you're going to give me some money.
It says I'm going to give you money, and if that's what you believe the essence of the partnership is,
no, of course not.
No. But what I mean is, but it is for some firms, right? It is for some. That is the essence of the partnership. It's like, we're going to give you the capital, and by the way, don't ever. I've always also said, I don't believe every investor has a responsibility to be a partner, because I really do believe that capital is enough to at least be of some value, like it's really valuable. But what we do is we actually give the entrepreneur 2 documents. We give them a term sheet and a draft joint strategic plan. And it talks about, squadra is a word for the Italian word for team. I would say there's 3 teams at a table: your team, our team, and the combined team. And this joint strategic plan talks about over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, which is usually our lens of progress. Here's what we kind of hope you accomplish. Here's what we want to help do, take responsibility for. Important. Squadra takes responsibility to help you do X, Y, and Z. And here's what we think we're going to work on together. And we take that sort of notion very seriously. And that enables us to launch into quote a partnership. So I am going to jump so I don't miss this flight, and I can actually get back to Baltimore today, which I'm very excited about after being on the road, Austin, Dallas, Portland, Hood River for the last 6 days. But thanks everybody, and great to see you, Ann, Laura, Michele, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. See ya.
Travels,
Bye.
we'll see you soon. Thanks. Great. So good questions on, good explanations on reps and warranty, really good conversation around the term sheet versus maybe the partnership and how to think about that as you're getting those, attracting outside capital. We had a question around how to best use the Board of Advisors time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of skill sets and backgrounds of both a board of directors and a board of advisors. So with a board of directors, you're probably having quarterly meetings, maybe even more frequently while you're getting up and running if you're in a startup or a high growth stage. With the board of advisors, the question from the Q&A was, advisors are really busy. They're probably working. They may have other companies that they're advising. And so should an entrepreneur kind of reach out individually to ask specific questions, or is there some value in kind of getting that board of advisors together regularly and having a meeting kind of where everyone can hear the questions and strategies that the founder's trying to work out? So I'll open that up to Laura, who's been that advisor, who's been on the bat phone or maybe has been in those meetings, and then to Michele.
Well, there's no question one of the fundamental differences between advisors and directors is that if a director makes a suggestion, you kind of have to follow it because they can force you to consider their perspective because of their responsibility as a director. Advisors can make suggestions, but you don't necessarily, as the entrepreneur, have to follow their advice. So I had a situation like this recently where I'm an advisor to a company, and I've been working with this entrepreneur for well over a year. He's terrific. In fact, I've had 2 of these recently with 2 different companies, different space, but both very talented technical entrepreneurs. And what I found is that I had made the same suggestion a couple times. And as an advisor, they don't have to take my advice. So I hope that they'll come around to the point where they see where I'm coming from and why this is a good advice. But at the end of the day, they don't have an obligation to follow it. I do the best I can for them as a member of their team and a supporter of theirs, but they and their board ultimately get to decide whether they will follow that advice.
Yeah, and Josh, I would say, having been on a board of advisors, it wasn't at all uncommon to get a phone call with a specific, like right in my area of expertise question. But the real value for the CEO and management team came in our quarterly advisory board meetings when all advisors representing kind of all the different skill sets and networks and perspectives would get together and strategize and provide advice on kind of where the business was.
I haven't seen much of that lately.
No.
But the way I have solved that problem is that I have a weekly meeting. So with any company where I'm an advisor, I have at least a 30-minute meeting every week just to touch base. Sometimes we're working on something and maybe we're putting together a marketing package or we're reviewing the pipeline to go after certain customers. And I might even sit on some of those customer calls if they're on Zoom. But in the absence of our typical gatherings, which I love so much, and I'm glad that they're starting to come back, the way I've solved that problem, and when I say we, I mean the entrepreneur myself, we've just had a standing call at the same time every week for 30 minutes.
Okay, good.
And maybe one way to look at it is the board of advisors, as Laura says, they make suggestions, but they have the industry expertise or specific expertise that the entrepreneur or the owner is looking for. So that's a great way to develop strategy. The board actually has to evaluate and review that strategy and vote on whether to pursue it. So, maybe that's a good way of sort of separating out. And one thing I've also said that you may find with some of your organizations, you may have a combination of advisors on the board. So you may be picking directors who have specific expertise. And then I've seen boards that break out into specific types of committees where that board of advisor function is being handled in a subgroup and then still brought back to the big board for the final vote.
That's
I
great.
do want to draw a distinction though, I'm sorry, Ann, I do want to draw this distinction though with a board of directors for a venture-backed company versus a board of directors for a company that hasn't yet taken any institutional money. Once a venture capital investor gets involved with your company and makes an investment, they have tremendous say and they will require tremendous say over who sits on your board of directors. So that is very different than when you're starting the company, maybe as an LLC, and you get to pick your own directors. It will change fundamentally. It is a shift. It is a seismic shift. And for many entrepreneurs, that's a little challenging because they want to pick their directors. And part of the deal terms in the term sheet will probably be that the venture investor gets to make a lot of those decisions.
And I think that's true, not just in your choice of board. I think that's probably a very difficult hurdle for the entrepreneur to get over, is ceding a lot of organizational and operational control once the investor steps in.
The hardest part, for sure.
The hardest part. You guys, what are some of the skills or networks or backgrounds that our listeners ought to be thinking about as they're thinking about forming their advisory board, or maybe they have an independent seat on a board of directors? Kind of what skills do you typically see? What backgrounds that you would recommend?
I will say, and I say this having been on a couple of nonprofit boards in a very uncomfortable situation I found myself in as a young person on my first board, your directors need to have at least some basic understanding of finances and accounting. Because again, if the money isn't going where it's supposed to be going, somebody is eventually going to look at the directors and say, you approve these financials every month. Why were you approving them? So that's absolutely critical. Your directors have to be able to read a balance sheet and other accounting information. I think also it's helpful to have, and again, I'm almost viewing this from the perspective of board members also having some advisory ability. But by statute, there are no specific requirements. So you would want, again, the financial background, perhaps somebody who's got some knowledge of audit issues or HR issues as the company starts to scale. I've definitely been involved with organizations where they are proactively looking for directors who have specific expertise, say, in scaling a business when they're ready to take the next step up in terms of business development and sales. Legal knowledge is helpful, but there's a fine line between being a lawyer who's a director and being a general counsel to a corporation. So you should not be looking to directors who happen to have Esquire after their name to provide legal advice to the company.
Gosh, we could have a whole conversation about nonprofit boards.
Yeah. Yes. We don't have to go there today.
Subject for sure. And, maybe we should do that in a future call because that would be interesting. There's no one in business who's been successful that isn't actively involved in nonprofits in the community. So there is a lot of crossover. And if you want to get on a board, it's often a good way to get that kind of experience. But there have been a lot of new regulations recently on the responsibility of boards of directors and your oversight. So we might want to touch on that briefly and how the new regulations have increased your obligation to sign off, not only to sign off, but then to be responsible for what you have agreed to in the governance of that organization. But as far as selecting advisors, I really think it depends on the stage of the company. There are many different needs. In the earliest stages, you want certainly someone who understands your industry, but you also want someone with a lot of experience who might not know your industry specifically because they might bring a new perspective. If you're looking for money and you want to raise venture capital, you want an advisor who's going to help you with that. Or if there's a certain target market you want to go after, you might be looking for advisors who can make those kinds of introductions or help you figure out how to convey the value of your idea. So it depends on the stage of the organization and whether or not this is a short-term advisor or someone who's going to be with the company long-term. And structuring their compensation for that advisory role, it really depends on where you are and exactly what you need from them.
The other thing that I think is really helpful for Board of Advisory members is, can they, do they have different networks? Can they help make introductions? Do they understand kind of how to scale your business and your go-to-market strategy? And can they help along that? They kind of almost extend your network, your Rolodex, your ability to kind of get into markets and meet people that you might not be able to. And Laura, because you have been there and done that, and now you're in the advisory role, kind of what's the importance of having someone who really has been, worn your shoes, if you will?
Well, I've had many different advisors, and having been on the other side of the table as the person looking for advisors, I've looked for lots of different types of experiences. And sometimes it's a business relationship that will go on for years where I feel like someone's just going to give me good advice and they're going to be a sounding board for me. And I know I can go to them regularly and touch base and say, this is where we're going to, what do you think about this? But I'll be honest and say I've also hired, in that I provided equity to advisors who just had subject matter expertise or certain credentials that boosted the credibility of my idea or my company. And you might think, gosh, why would I want to give away equity to someone like that? Well, the truth is they're not going to sign on to your company unless they believe in what you're doing. So they're going to vet the opportunity, and their vetting brings credibility to what you have to offer. And so I'll give you a great example. I once wanted an advisor who was at Stanford, and he was an expert in supply chain management. We were based in Maryland, he was based in California, but he knew supply chain management better than anyone else in the country. And having his stamp of approval on our idea, on our product, brought us credibility. And so I was willing to make that trade-off. In fact, he ended up becoming one of our best advisors. So, have an open mind about what that looks like, and be clear about what you're looking for as you begin the conversation with them.
Great advice. So before we move on to our next topic, any questions about board of directors? What's the difference? How do they work together? Thing like that.
And I think, so Dave Tilley asked a question that I think you just answered part of that question. What type of expertise should be represented on either type of board? And I think you discussed just that right now. And then his second question, what are some good ways to find these types of people?
Right, I saw that, because we're going to talk about that later, but we can hop into that now if you want to. So how do you go about finding the right people, right? Most people have a limited network, and so you tend to kind of go to the people you know. So how do you break out of that kind of known circle? There's lots and lots of research about the importance of diversity on boards, and diversity in all its form, right? Kind of diversity of thought, network, skills, gender, racial, socioeconomic. On how do you really expand that and find the kind of resources and the people you need to move your business forward?
Well, in this way, LinkedIn is very much your friend. So this is one of the greatest uses of LinkedIn. It's a way to identify people who, might become part of your expanded network. And so it does a couple things. One is it will identify a particular skill set or a particular organization. You can see a picture of the person. You can also, very importantly, find out if anyone in your network knows that person. So it's a way of connecting. And then of course you can send out a LinkedIn request directly. I'm just amazed at the number of people who just send me a LinkedIn request and say, can I meet with you? And so, for me, I try to say yes when those situations come up, but you'd be surprised at how many times people will respond to a warm introduction. So, obviously the internet is a great research tool. I mean, you can find out a lot about people's backgrounds. Some of us of a certain age remember when that wasn't available. And so we would request information from companies, or we would call people and try to track it down. Now everything is at our fingertips, but LinkedIn is really the most reliable resource for expanding that network and connecting.
Yeah, that's great. Michele, do you have any other ideas on how you like to network?
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little old-fashioned as well, because I use LinkedIn, but probably not as much as I should. I enjoy kind of the in-person stuff. And I will say, Ann, in response to the first part of your question, we all do have bias. It's just a natural, it's a natural inclination. It's not necessarily intentional, but we look for people who we feel comfortable with. And sometimes building a good board or a good board of advisors requires you go outside your comfort zone. So I think Laura's tips on LinkedIn usage is very helpful. I would also say there are other organizations, for example, Executive Alliance, that will work with organizations to help match suitable advisors or directors with organizations. So that's a little bit of pre-vetting, a little bit of filtering. But again, I think the key thing is to have a good and honest understanding of what you're looking for in your director or advisor, and then being willing to go outside your own narrow circle, which maybe not so narrow, but to go out your own personal, outside of your own personal circle and look for people that meet the skill sets that you're looking for, rather than somebody that you're just comfortable working with. It may not be the best fit.
I can honestly say I've never been to a meeting where I didn't feel like I gained some value from that experience. I've attended Executive Alliance events, large events where there have been speakers. I've attended smaller groups where I got to really get to know the folks. It was actually happened to be a board discussion with Executive Alliance. And I've met with complete strangers who have reached out to me on LinkedIn. And I don't think I've ever left one of those meetings without feeling like I gained something from that experience. So I'm super excited that we're all starting to see each other again and spend time together again, because we all have a lot to offer. And sometimes those meetings that you think are not going to bring as much end up being the most valuable. And the times when I haven't wanted to go to an event is when I've gotten the most out of it. Or the times when I thought, oh, I'm going to go for 5 minutes and then I'm going to zip out of there, is the time that, I ended up staying till the very, very end. So, just keep an open mind. Everybody gets nervous when we meet new people, and, when we sit down at a table and we don't know the other people at the table. But the truth is, everyone has something to offer. And once we, actually start talking to each other, they're always interesting conversations.
That's right. It used to be that entrepreneurs would look for very, very experienced, seasoned, kind of gray-haired ex-CEO types with, gravitas for their board. It's almost kind of like, you don't get fired for buying IBM, right? But in today's world, there are some sectors where the pace of change and innovation is really, really rapid. And so, can you make an argument that somebody younger with competencies in a field might be a more valuable board member than a C-level executive with 25 plus years of experience?
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Thank you. Personally, I love millennials. I know they get a lot of grief. I think every board not only should have diversity of race and gender and perspective and opinion, but of age. Every board should have a young person on it. And by young, I mean 30 or younger, maybe 35 or younger. And I know you're thinking, gosh, does that person bring the experience that's necessary for governance or advising? And the truth is, they bring a whole different perspective. And I have never been in a meeting with a young person that I didn't think, gosh, I hadn't really thought about it that way. So I love that idea. I wish we did more of that. I was looking forward to the day that I'd be the gray hair. But the truth is that now that I have all this experience, I'm really glad that I get to interact with young people who bring a new perspective. This generation is so smart, and I know they get a lot of grief, but I got to tell you, I've never been more impressed. They are so educated and so capable. And I think that you're only serving your organization well by bringing in that perspective.
Yeah, I agree completely. Michele, do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, I agree. I think young people especially bring a lot of energy. So even if they don't have the years of experience and some of the nuts and bolts, they're not afraid to throw out ideas. And ideas, you got to have a lot of ideas that are just thrown out there that you can then use to develop into something that works for your organization. So I think it's very helpful. And you also want, people who've got passion. I know it's an overused word, but there's no point in having a C-suite person on your board who's just going to flit in and out and not be very helpful. You want somebody who's really interested in your organization, your ideas, and helping to grow and make something interesting happen with it. And I think a lot of times, bringing in the younger folks, the fresh blood helps with that.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And if you're looking at these competencies, whether that's social media or cybersecurity or supply chain or, kind of those kind of areas and competencies that may not have been around for years and years. You're going to need to really hone in on someone who really brings that and may not bring the big flashy title or years and years and years of experience to the party. I think that sounds good. We did have a question about any special tips for choosing a chair or co-chair of an advisory board, especially with regard on how to escape comfort zones. So how do you go about kind of picking a chair or co-chair?
Means by escape comfort zone, but I would say in my case, it would be the person who's most willing to do it.
Yes. And if I could also make a plug for the OCD person who's good about starting on time and sticking to the agenda. It's great to have, we always joke in my family, we're not necessarily the most creative people, but we're always on time with a number 2 pencil neatly sharpened. You need people like us too to help keep things moving.
That's exactly where I was going.
Something to that.
It's a special skill set. I mean, that is valuable. And, I think sometimes we don't give it the credence that it's due, because there are a lot of smart people out there with a lot to offer. But, the person who's keeping things running and keeping the trains moving on time is probably the one who is the one who is best at leading that.
Yep. In the last couple of minutes that we have, let's throw up our next poll, which is really around kind of where do you need help with your board? Because, it's all well and good to get this great group of individuals together who are governing or advising your organization and moving them forward. But if you can't figure out how to structure that group, make them effective, help get them engaged, then it's all for naught, really. You need to make sure that you're doing the best you can to create an environment and a structure that allows them to be effective and helpful, uses their time wisely, and so that you get the value out of it, and so do the participants. So it looks like there's some questions around how do you leverage board member expertise? So kind of, Laura, what common pitfalls do you see with startup companies as they try to harness the expertise and power of their boards? Where do they kind of excel in doing that, and where do they fall short, and how can we prevent that from happening?
Well, what I've noticed with a lot of organizations where I've been an advisor, they often think that because you're an advisor, you're going to get that deal closed for them. And that could be a potential customer, or it could be a round of financing. And the truth is that isn't the role of the advisor. The role of the advisor is to bring perspective and experience, and maybe even an introduction. But the company has to stand on its own merits. And I know I'm given a dose of some serious medicine here, but it's happened many times where I've had an organization, the CEO, the founder approach me and say, I really need you to, put together some financing for me, or make an they say make an introduction, and what they really mean is they want me to get the deal closed for them. I can't say strongly enough how important it is for the organization to stand on its own. The product has to stand on its own, the idea has to stand on its own, and the management team has to stand on its own. So an advisor can make those connections for you, and any, seasoned advisor is going to bring an extensive network. I mean, I or any other advisor is going to be able to make a phone call and get a venture capitalist on the phone, or a potential prospect, or someone who knows that potential prospect. But it's not up to the advisor to close that deal. The company, the entrepreneur, the team, the product must stand on its own, and the company must be able to get the deal closed. And if you can't, it means that maybe it's not as strong as it needs to be in order to get that to happen. So, I think there's this tendency to think, gosh, I have this advisor, they should be making this happen for me. And that's not actually their role. Their role is to guide you through the process.
Right. I see people are also wondering, how do we identify the skills? I would say whether it's a board of advisors or, you've got a venture, your funders are on your board, look at your business plan, your operating plan for the year, for the next 18 months. What are you trying to accomplish? What are your priorities? Is that a funding raise? Is that a huge amount of hiring? Is that building out a sales channel? Is that raising another round? Kind of tie the skills and the way that you're tapping into your board of directors, if that's set, or if you're in the process of creating an advisory board, tie those skills, networks, expertise to your strategy, right? Neither of these groups should operate or exist in isolation, right? They're not these, omniscient bodies that just kind of, know where you're going. You have to look at what you're trying to accomplish as a management team in an organization, and then map that strategy and those priorities to the skills and expertise you're trying to tap.
I will tell you, I sit in on sales calls. I sit in on marketing and messaging meetings. Sometimes I don't participate. I'm quietly listening just to sort of get some perspective on, how the idea is being received or the product's being received. And sometimes I give advice that, is tough to give, it might not be working. Maybe it's not headed in the direction it needs to go. In one case recently, I had to say, look, I'm not sure your product is directly meeting the needs of the market. So, that it was a tough call, but it's also a great idea. I mean, it's still, there's enough there to make that into a really strong product. It's about making sure that it meets the needs of the market. So, a real engaged advisor is going to get to know your business and spend time and invest the time in your business to be helpful. If you don't feel like they're being helpful, if they're not really, providing a true sounding board and good advice, and if they're not engaged enough to really understand what your challenges are, then that's probably not the right advisor. That's not someone you want to give up equity for. Maybe you'll pay them for a month or 2 or 3 and see if it's worthwhile to engage them as a vendor, but that's different than an advisor.
Yeah, I think it comes back to accountability. I think is really what I'm hearing from the two of you. It's your responsibility as the owner, the management team, to figure out what it is you're trying to get done, and then pick people who can address specific needs. And then when you reach out to them for assistance, you don't want to waste their time. You want to be very focused on what you need, what your ask is of them, and how you're going to take that ask and turn it into production, so to speak.
Do either of you have any tips on how our entrepreneurs can run a successful board meeting?
Oh gosh, yes, we should do a future event on this. I'm sure Michele has a lot more to offer to this than I do.
I'm just laughing because I'm dealing right now with an incredibly dysfunctional board, and it's making life actually very difficult. I think first and foremost, it comes back to establishing a functional board, a board of people who meet certain skills and who can help you accomplish the goals of the organization, and who are not in it for personal reasons or reasons that don't directly impact the success of the organization. That's a starting point. Everyone has to be marching in the same direction at this, to the same drummer. I would also say, frankly, having a very good working knowledge of Robert's rules is very important, because that is a way to control the meeting. So you come in with a clear agenda, a clear understanding of how discussion is going to work, what votes are going to be taken, how votes are going to be taken. Another tip I would say is if your organizational documents are written in a way to permit it, you can also delegate certain things to executive committees or management committees, so that the board does not have to micromanage every decision for the organization. You want the board making the big decisions, the ones that really carry financial or legal risk, but you don't necessarily want to have to go to the board every time you want to do something. So that'd be like another tip that I would offer.
So I love everything that you said, Michele. I completely 100% agree with all of it. I'm going to also add the perspective from the entrepreneur who's been putting together these meetings. I have had board members who were in an adversarial relationship with me. It's been a long time, but it has happened. And one of the things that I learned is that when you're in that situation, and in fact, even when you're not, you should be meeting with your board members regularly. So the more communication you have with your board members before you actually get to the board meeting, the better the meeting's going to go. And so it's important to build those relationships and to build them constantly and consistently. So if you come into the meeting and you now have this connection or understanding or relationship or even friendship with those board members, it's going to be a much smoother meeting. So I really encourage that, building those bridges, building that bridge with each board member. And then, please, I beg of you, come in with an agenda, a plan, and a presentation. So, and share it in advance. So if there's a clear understanding of what you wish to accomplish in the meeting, you're going to have a much more productive meeting. There's usually social time on the front end, and then the meeting starts at a certain time and hopefully ends at a certain time. And if the relationships are already in place, I'm a big believer in over communicating with your board members. Then you can come in with your agenda and make sure that that agenda is accomplished. Too many meetings, I can tell you there's not a presentation, there's not a clear plan for what will get accomplished. And then it becomes a meandering conversation. And so while there's room for meandering conversation, that should be before or after the actual agenda meeting.
Yeah, great tips. We had a question about, how do you filter through advisory candidates? Maybe you put out an ask, you reach out on LinkedIn, you get lots of resumes or people who are interested, and you don't want, you want to filter through the ones who are maybe just looking at it for a paycheck or some equity versus the ones who are really in it and invested. How should an entrepreneur be thinking about that?
Well, having been on both sides of that question, I am a big believer in people who show up. So I've always been one to show up first and ask later. If the person comes into the conversation and hands you, their agreement, their advisor agreement, and says, "Hey, let me give you my terms," you're not really off to a good start. I have never even gotten to an agreement discussion without spending days, weeks, or months with a company, getting to know the entrepreneur and getting to know the company. So, I'm willing to invest up front because I just believe in supporting the entrepreneurial community. And I've always done that, and I still do that. So, I'm working with one company where I still haven't signed an advisor agreement. It was finally sent to me a couple months into working together, but it just wasn't I'm doing it because I believe in the company. And so that trust is built over time. I'm not saying that everyone should do it that way, but that's how I do it. I'm just always going to be a believer in you show up and you're about getting the work done and you work out the deal terms.
Okay, great. Good. Well, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to toss it over to Rebecca Snyder.
Hi, well, thank you guys for an amazing conversation, and sort of in keeping with every meeting should have an agenda and a clear delineation. I think just to add to that filtering through of potential candidates, I think a lot of it starts with knowing what you want. So maybe looking at a board matrix, understanding the skill sets that you're looking to bring to your board might also help. I do want to, knowing that it's 12:54. We want to leave a little time for questions. We've gotten a few as we've gone along the way. Do our participants have any other questions that you'd like the panel to answer? We can either just put it in the Q&A or raise hands. And while people are formulating their last and final thoughts, maybe our panelists could put their contact information in the chat. If you want to reach out to Executive Alliance, we're at www.executivealliance.org. Thank you, David. I think this has been really insightful as well. Any final questions? All right, I feel like everyone has now gotten 5 minutes of their day back. So the best meetings end a little early, so we'll do that. And Ala, did you want to wrap up? We really appreciate the partnership that we have with the University of Maryland to bring these conversations to the fore. So what's next for you all, Ala?
Well, first of all, thank you so much to the Executive Alliance, and thank you so much to Ann Quinn, Laura Neuman, Michele Cohen, and Guy Filippelli for this fantastic discussion. And also thank you to the attendees. Thank you for the great question. Thank you to Clayton Sullivan, who I think very insightfully plucked out very important quotes from the conversations and posted them in the chat. Thank you, Clayton. I also wanted to remind everybody that if you are a faculty or a student at the University of Maryland, University of Bowie State University, Coppin State, Morgan State University, University of Baltimore, you have access to our entrepreneurs in residence. Laura Neuman is one of them. So if you would like to continue this conversation one-on-one with Laura, let me know, and we can schedule a one-on-one appointment with you. So again, thank you to everybody who joined us today. I will post a recording of this session on our Startup UMD YouTube channel, and you can review that. And for those who couldn't attend today but are watching us on YouTube, also thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. It's great to see you, Michelle. It's great to see you, Ann. Rebecca, thank you for the work you're doing to support women on boards. It's very important.